dropped at the beginning. So thank you everybody for joining. I am happy to see so many people on the call. So before my internet drops again, I'm going to jump right in and start this webinar with Josh, Nico, and Alvaro. So Resourcive is the premier value creation partner for mid-market and enterprise organizations. We work with our clients to drive as much value out of the technology that they consume. And specifically, we do this focusing on the sourcing of those technologies and implementation to deliver ROI to the business. So we do this through multiple pillars of IT: voice, mobility, network, security, IoT, contact center, and managed services. And as it is applicable for today, we also work in the cloud and infrastructure space. So the type of work that we do going in and engaging with our clients, we understand where they are today, what their business challenges are, and what they're doing or what they're trying to accomplish. Over the past 3 to 4 years, what we've seen is a large increase in the work that we're doing around cloud and infrastructure. And in working these types of engagements with so many different types of clients, we've kind of come to understand that there really is no one size fits all solution when it comes to where to host your applications and your data. So that's kind of why we're here today, to talk about that and kind of share what we've learned. Josh White, our consultant who kind of specializes in this area, is going to lead today. So Josh, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today. Josh White, consultant. I have my background heavily in working on several different cloud compute projects with different models under that, which we'll go over in a few minutes, but glad to be here today and be part of this.
Get Alvaro and Nico introduced.
Good guys. So where we left off, folks, after that technical, sorry for the, thanks for your patience. We have Alvaro Gonzalez and Nico Har. Really glad to have them as our guest speakers, the partners we've worked with several times on different projects. They're going to offer their expertise. We'll be having conversations with them. Alvaro will have some really good stuff to share towards the end that we'll get to as well. So thanks, everybody. Okay, everybody see the agenda? Just want to make sure we're housekeeping here. Awesome, thank you. So over the next, I guess, 50 minutes now, folks, we're going to go over the current state of the cloud environment in the industry. Okay, then we'll get into defining, providing a little definition, because what's happening is what we're realizing, as you probably know in your own interactions, that everybody kind of defines hybrid different ways. So we kind of want to standardize that and make sure we're all kind of launching off the same playing field before we get into it. And then that allows us to kind of get into the different components over that, and which will dovetail right into a lot of factors that come into play in determining that right approach to tackling a cloud computing strategy. Then, like I said, we'll wrap it up here with Alvaro. He's got a great business case, real life business case. Hey, it's like a story tells 1,000 words. He's going to go through that case of an organization that had to, the considerations they made in moving to a hybrid and the factors involved with that. So we'll jump right into it. As I mentioned, the current state in the industry today. This depiction of a study of just last year. The report actually came out earlier this year, but the study of last year, and it's a very wide swath of industries, including 750 IT professionals across that. Most of these, I would say, vast majority, almost 70% of these, are enterprise level organizations. So what you can clearly see this from this is, organizations are not, enterprises in particular, are not putting their eggs in one basket, right? They're putting and deploying and consuming those services over multiple cloud resources, as you can see. And that's kind of consistent with the projects I'm working on, my colleagues are working on in our organization and interacting with our experts here. We're seeing these trends happening, and it just proves the fact by these studies. Okay, so real quick, very simply, like I said, there was a lot of conjecture. What is hybrid? Everybody has their own interpretation. I simplify it here. It's really a combination of these different models. And when an organization starts going down the path of moving one away from one type of model, i.e. on-premise or public, and they start thinking about diversifying their data and their workloads into other cloud resources, well, guess what? They are starting that path down the hybrid route. You are going through that strategy or undergoing through that strategy. So I kind of showed you, the industry looks like it's moving that direction. People are moving that direction, defining that. So, why? What's happening here? What's happening in our industry? Well, the one thing that's constant is change, right? Businesses are changing. They're trying to figure out how to adapt to change. You know how complexity it is as a leader in your IT organization of adapting to change. So hybrid gives you flexibility, gives organizations the flexibility of putting the data where they want, in the areas they want, that gives them where it makes sense for the most part. And for example, changes happen. There's certain workloads that need to be expanded. So those workloads go into certain places in the cloud to allow for expansion. There are other workloads that need to be totally secure and locked down as well. Okay, so it just allows that flexibility and diversity for you. But it comes at a sort of at a price. There's a lot going on here, as you can see in this slide. There's a lot that comes into play. There's a lot of decisions and considerations that need to be made, a lot of levers that you need to pull in heading down this path. And that's why what we see is a lot of stakeholders in the projects that we work on. We invite different stakeholders to come in, kind of review everything from the cost all the way to their roadmap, their business plan, in determining how to go about tackling this. Nico, if you want to kind of add to that, expand on that, kind of look at those different areas to the right that you see, the different considerations that companies are facing, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And I definitely don't want to go exhaustively through this, but I think the point that we're trying to hit here is the complexity. There's a lot going on, and ultimately we take these factors into consideration when selecting the right cloud for the right workload. So whether that is the cost based on how the application is designed and how it scales, the resources it uses, if it's an always on workload or if it's dev that we can shut down for different periods of time, maybe that's better served in the public cloud. Or alternately, if it's something that you need that's seasonal or that needs to be able to quickly scale out or scale up, maybe that again is a public cloud workload versus something that's a little more static, predictable. You want to keep the costs in line, or you need to really, as Josh was saying, nail down the security and compliance elements. Maybe private cloud is the right fit for that workload. And so again, it's going to be different really for every customer and for every workload, but that's kind of what we're here to help with, is selecting the right cloud.
Awesome. Thanks, Nico. So one of the first components, now that we've kind of give you an overview of that hybrid and kind of define why are people moving there, let's start with the first component that makes up the hybrid cloud, colocation. Okay. I hope these numbers can depict that, colocation is not going anywhere. It's proven, and it will continue to be proven through these studies that you see in these research and market reports, that it still will become a major player, major force for organizations for years to come. Okay, and I'm working on colo projects just as much as the other models that I'm working, my colleagues and I. So this is very consistent with what we're facing in reality, and you may be facing in reality, in understanding, hey, some of the stuff has to remain colo. And why is that? Okay, well, I think what happens is organizations are moving stuff to the cloud, but they're taking a peek under the hood and realizing, geez, we have a lot of applications that you simply can't just, lack of a better phrase, rip apart. There's a lot of interdependencies between applications. There's a lot of proprietary, homegrown applications, business processes that have been built for years with the organization. And if you try to break it apart or diversify, there will be a ripple effect that you can't do. We know VMware in the industry, we know virtualization industry, that's one of the drivers of cloud. Well, guess what? There's a lot of applications that still, that can't reside on VMware or other virtualization layers, platforms. So they have to kind of remain with those layers as well. As far as the other ones, Nico, if you'd like to kind of expand in those other areas there, in the context of the colo value and how it relates to some of those key areas.
Yeah, I think ultimately with colo, what we're looking to do is really hedge against downtime for power, for cooling, for network diversity. Typically, it's because we have hardware that we're already depreciating or amortizing. We're not ready to maybe shift those workloads into kind of an as-a-service model yet. That hardware hasn't come end of life, or maybe we need to get out of a lease. We're decreasing office space, especially with the pandemic. Obviously, that's a big trend, but we want to still keep the equipment. Colo fits those use cases. And then any of these sort of more net new kind of cutting edge examples like edge compute, like IoT, machine learning, where if we're doing anything with autonomous vehicles or smart grid, healthcare devices and wearables and things like that, where you want to have a presence, actual compute presence, as close to that end user, that end device as possible. Colo can be really helpful in those scenarios because not every cloud provider is going to have a presence everywhere, but there's bound to be a data center pretty much anywhere that you might need one. So whether it is that legacy or sort of more cutting edge, ultimately colo fits a bunch of different use cases and can play really well with the cloud components, which we'll be speaking to shortly.
Excellent, thanks, Nico. And if you want to further expand on the interconnection aspect there, Nico.
Yeah, and so this slide is really just showing an example, but often we see colo used for interconnection as well. So if I have multiple public cloud environments, I'm in AWS East and West, maybe I'm also in Azure. Maybe I even have some Azure footprint in the UK, for example. Setting up colo facilities as sort of either your primary hub or a regional hub purely for connectivity, right? Maybe I have some workload sitting there, or maybe it's just kind of this hub of my network that I connect to. And then from there, I have direct connects to AWS. I have an express route to Azure. So I'm able to direct my traffic, keep my costs down, especially those egress costs on public cloud, which can really get out of control, and also guarantee performance by using something like a direct connect or an express route where you're going to get an SLA from that carrier and from that cloud provider. So we see the interconnection piece. There have been entire companies like Megaport and Packet Fabric that have been founded on that premise. And colo providers are continuing to increase the number of connections they have, both to carriers and to cloud providers, to make sure that it's really relevant for their customers.
All right, thanks, Nico. So Nico and I touched on that first component, the second component, cloud. And when we talk about cloud here in this context, we're going to talk about public and private, and then kind of dive into each after that. So whether it's public or private, okay, what we're seeing is, as I mentioned, that change theme that I've mentioned before. Organizations are changing. They're whether they're forced, changing their organization, they're responding to the demands, the fluctuations that are happening. And it's much more effective to be able to respond to that with a cloud-based solution for scalability, things of that nature, to expand those. The in-house expertise, when you are adapting the change in an organization and having to make those changes quickly, it's hard for an organization to have that in-house expertise, technical expertise, to handle those changes. So a lot of organizations, leadership are kind of looking at the business aspects of adapting to these changes, okay? Namely, okay, do we look at continuing expenditures in FTE or alleviate those costs for a managed service? Okay, are we looking at alleviating the capital expenditures? Again, capital expenditures involved with adaptation to change. and to be more specific, a lot of organizations, they have a data center, it's on premise or, you know, at their headquarters or one of their locations. But because of changes in the industry, they're having to adapt. What happens when they adapt? You have to make a lot of expenditures. There's a lot of cost, a lot of expenditure involved with renovations, expansion, power, maintenance, everything involved with expanding that footprint if you wholly own it. So, you know, that is one of, you know, the key business aspects as well as technical aspects of moving, whether it's public or private. Nico, anything you want to kind of expand here on the other points?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get into it a little more as we go specifically into private and public, but really it just comes down to digital transformation. Every business is doing it, and everyone is just at a different point in that journey. So some businesses and customers that we talk to are 100% cloud native. You know, all of their applications are architected for public cloud. That's just where they kind of were born. And others are completely at the other end of the spectrum, just starting to maybe dip their toe into some private cloud. So again, it really depends, but I think it kind of is the end state. Obviously a hybrid approach, but cloud or sort of as a service tends to make sense for the majority of workloads. It's just kind of determining where and how.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, so high level on cloud, defining that strategy and the benefits of it. Now we kind of dive into the definitions. And you hear private cloud. Again, this is one of those terms that gets tossed about, and there's different interpretations of what that is. Simply here, we're going to simplify it. It's really infrastructure as a service. You know, it's VMware, the virtualization layer that has come through the, you know, these past 10 plus years or so has really changed the game. So a lot of the providers, the projects that we're working on, a private cloud provider is basically providing a virtualization, everything up from a virtualization layer and enabling the flexibility of that client to manage everything above that you see there. Nico, we've got the other models here, and it probably would help the audience here if you kind of touch on those models briefly, kind of compare it to an IaaS model, and that will kind of give it a little bit more context because there's our decisions that are involved these type of models when you come up with your hybrid approach.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key here is just as we go from left to right, it's basically outsourcing more. So on-prem, obviously you control the entire stack, you own it, you buy it, you manage it. As we move to infrastructure as a service, we're taking that core compute infrastructure, servers, the storage and networking, and typically the virtualization layer, the hypervisor, outsourcing that. So like you mentioned, that could be a VMware environment, that could be Amazon EC2, that could be Azure. But then as we move a little bit further up the stack, we're outsourcing more, but that means we have less to manage. But it also may mean we're maybe in a little bit more of a box, right? We have a little less customization available to us. So PaaS is all those different tools, maybe your database as a service, containers, all sorts of services from AWS, from Azure. And then as we go into SaaS, that's kind of, you know, everyone here is probably using on a day-to-day basis. We're using SaaS right now with Zoom, Dropbox and OneDrive, 365, Salesforce, RingCentral, 8x8, you name it. So often when we have that kind of right cloud for the right workload conversation, we're looking at, well, is there a SaaS option? Because if there is, that's often the starting point. It may not be the right fit, but we typically start there. Okay, is the SaaS solution going to make sense here? If not, then we'll work our way back to, you know, PaaS or IaaS. But that's kind of often how we see these conversations and these workloads sort of get split up amongst the various environments that can host them.
Yeah, excellent, Nico. And then just to kind of further exemplify that point, just in our own practice here at Resourcive as consultants, we'll be working on a cloud compute, you know, data center project. And one of the things we kind of look at is their applications and identifying. We realize, you know, it could be a legacy phone system or some type of application that we realize, oh, you could move that to SaaS. So part of that byproduct of helping an organization optimize when we're working on a cloud compute work stream is a discovering applications that they might not have realized otherwise that could be moved to one of the other models there on the right, and a byproduct optimization savings from that. Okay, little definition here. Now we're going to get into the cloud, the reasons for this. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, folks. Nothing fancy here. It's nice for an organization to be able to turn to, make a phone call, reach out to an expert to get help. Okay. They getting help with migrating their workloads, getting them ramped up. They're getting help with offloading and the ongoing management that gets taken off an organization's plate, and frankly, frees that organization up by removing that all that noise, all that migration noise, all that maintenance, ongoing management noise, if you will, in that environment. It's a huge value when I see leadership, just freeing them up on their core competencies that they're trying to do and have someone else work on these. Predictable OpEx. Now you've got a predictable model, OpEx model for finance to kind of scope out in their business planning for years to come. Nico, I'll let you kind of touch on the other, aspects there. The performance, security, obviously, is a big factor as well.
Yeah, security is a really big one that we see, and in a private cloud environment where you might be looking for someone to help you take on the different components of that security responsibility, the backup and disaster recovery, building in resiliency, all the various security features, whether we're looking at MDR, SASE, or ZTNA, or whatever the latest acronym from Gartner might be. The management, of course, the SOC, so the Security Operations Center, if you want the actual staffing to help build out and manage that security posture. So to your point, Josh, there's a lot that goes into it, but that's a big one, especially now that we're seeing as more and more regulations are released and more businesses need to comply with certain standards.
Excellent. Thanks, Nico. Okay, so in contrast to private, public cloud, there really is a lack of support. And that leads to a lot of complexities by having that lack of support. Complexity is in, now it's more on the client to manage multiple VMs across the major public cloud players. It's on the client to manage their cost, making sure their cost escalations from going into a public cloud isn't spiraling out of control. So there's a lot of pressure on the clients, to keep those costs and manage those costs. A lot of difficulties in that. But however, there are managed service partners that we work with. They will manage the container orchestration. They will add in the security, that we kind of talked about before, the security component of it for a public cloud environment. They will add in and build a disaster recovery and backup plan for that. So there are resources in a public cloud environment through our managed partners as well. Nico, if you want to kind of expand and add to that on how they help.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of it, but I mean, if you think about like every year, Amazon releases hundreds of new features, just using them as an example in AWS, right? So you might have even if it's as simple as, hey, I have a SQL database as part of this application, there's 6 different ways to consume that on AWS. So how do I architect it? Which one do I choose? Do I just throw it into EC2 as another VM? This is where you see costs can kind of quickly spiral out of control. And you hear about cloud sprawl, and we see these just massive, complex AWS bills. So MSPs who specialize and are certified in public cloud, they've got the people on staff and the expertise to be able to kind of work through those different kinks, help you architect your applications the right way, leverage the right services, figure out the multi-cloud connectivity piece, of course, the security like we were just talking about, and just really optimizing your cost, keeping everything in line, keeping it predictable is key when it comes to the AWS, the Azure, the Google, the Oracle environments.
Excellent. Yeah, and just that report that I alluded to at the beginning that was just released. One of the key findings, and it's consistent with what we just discussed here, is that enterprise are going to be more inclined to utilize and manage service partner to manage the public cloud for these complexities, and which it makes sense. The enterprises are going to have the larger cloud environments. All right, so we kind of bring it back to the theme of this that we've kind of illustrated building this up. And really what's happening is, as we alluded to, no, not one size fits all. So that left side that organizations, find themselves in, whether it's on premise or a public cloud, they are discovering, we're working with these projects and they're discovering, hey, by diversifying, kind of like a mutual fund portfolio, if you will, but by diversifying your data, your applications amongst these different resources, you are really gaining a lot of leverage. And what I mean by that is you're spreading from a strategic business point of view, you're spreading your workloads, your applications amongst different providers. You're not locked into one particular vendor. You have your workloads that are spread across that, giving you negotiating flexibility and just nimbleness to adapt to changes in your environment. And a little example of that, the data processing. If you're able to take a lot of your data processing and spread it across, if you will, one of these different avenues or two of these different avenues in a hybrid situation, you are really optimizing the performance, the efficiencies of your data processing applications that we see with a lot of the larger enterprises as well. And I know, Nico, you probably want to touch on it, what we're seeing, another interesting trend that we're seeing, this public cloud to hybrid, that kind of repatriation that we're seeing in the trend that you might be hearing about as well. So if you'd like to kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I was almost muted, but I caught myself. So great point around repatriation. I'm sure that Alvaro is seeing that as well, and he may touch on it later. But for a variety of reasons, it may be that cloud sprawl and the bills spiraling, trying to get costs back under control. It may be that we simply moved a legacy prem environment to the cloud, kind of like for like. And we're just leveraging VMs and storage in AWS or Azure, that we're not taking advantage of those platforms. The costs are going to be very high and the benefits aren't there. So, or maybe it's a lack of expertise, right? But whatever it is, we're seeing a lot of those repatriation discussions where they're moving back into private cloud or even a colo for maybe not all workloads, but a percentage of them. And we were looking into some of the stats here, and according to 451 research, 48% of IT decision makers last year migrated applications back out of AWS, Azure, or Google. So essentially half. And 96% of those that moved out said that cost efficiency was the top benefit. So as we discussed, right workload or right cloud for the right workload, and it often does come down to what does that sort of run state look like and what are the costs associated with that? And if we can get those to be predictable and understand kind of that we're not going to spiral out of control, then that's where we want that work to be.
Yeah, and further looking at from the market point of view, how do I go about this? Well, Resourcive, us as a consulting team, from our years of experience, we have a deep bench bullpen of partners that we work with. On the public side, the private side, we have worked with these partners to come up with that combination of approach, a combination of solutions to execute your hybrid cloud strategy. And this segues nicely into Alvaro Gonzalez of Expedient. We're very honored to have him here. He'll expand on that example from Expedient on this moving from an organization that was confronting with a lot of the challenges, considerations that Nico and I were touching upon, and now you're going to kind of see it in action through Alvaro's words on how this was achieved, and give you guys some good food for thought as a takeaway from this.
And let's hang here for 1 second,
Sure.
Josh. Go back a slide for a moment, just to kind of like do the transition. Yeah, hi, I'm Alvaro. I have an embarrassingly high number of years now working in this field, with touching kind of like every part of the elephant, from working in network to colo to cloud to public cloud and all of these things. And I would say that to take the content that we had up to now and to then frame it for the next step of what I get a minute to discuss with you, is to just kind of point out that, like, we've had lots of discussion around categories, and categories, we can kind of say two things about them. One is that they're really useful, and the other is that they're also inexact, because every one of these different things, be it talking about a colo only, a private cloud only, a public cloud only, you could kind of recast in a number of different ways, because you can have, for example, a cloud that is not private, is VMware, and the distinction is that an AWS, an Azure, a GCP, and all of these things are a different hypervisor. There's still virtualization, right? There are lots of kind of shades of gray between these things that allow people to align with, as Nico says, the right workloads in the right clouds. I call it horses for courses because it rhymes, which obviously means that it's true. So every one of those categories kind of has what, again, an old boss of mine used to call weddings and funerals. There are things that are good about it, and there are things that are bad. Fundamentally, the question, though, I think comes, if we always end up circling back in all of this conversation to talk about efficiency as being the driver of the decision, it's kind of, I'm stating something pretty obvious, but it's also something that's a super recurring driver of change in this industry and people's decision making. And that is, there are different levels of efficiency. There's efficiency for this or for that or for the other that don't necessarily all correlate to effectiveness, which is maybe ultimately how we're going to judge the value that results from things, right? I'm a big book guy. Chapter 1 of Team of Teams, General McChrystal's book, has an incredible discussion, actually, the distinction between efficiency, which is doing things right, and effectiveness, which is doing the right things. Hybridity, ultimately, we're going to be pointed at effectiveness. If you want to go forward now for a second, Josh.
Sure.
So Expedient actually had a customer that was facing, lots of change in the business, and their problem statement that I started with here was simply that this is a manufacturing company that had come up on a time when they had really one obvious change that they were facing, and that was all of the server storage infrastructure for core applications and their remote locations is coming into a refresh cycle. So this is obviously the opportunity that you get to evaluate, what are we going to do about this now? Are we going to continue to operate the way that we have, or are we going to take this time to try to chart a different course that's better to get after what's both the most efficient and effective solution to balance our technical requirements against financial and headcount constraints? It's essentially, what the outcome versus the time and the money. And the basic requirements for them were, probably the same that practically everyone is facing sooner or later, and probably has faced once or twice already. And that is, we need to have infrastructure and kind of like a runtime plan for core applications for production, disaster recovery for those applications to hedge against, unintended circumstances like our little internet blips today, the submarine story that's in the news, right? That all the risks that we're hedging against, they surround us all the time. In addition, though, to this production use case, the DR use case as well, data protection and backup, disaster recovery, data protection, they are similar, but they are not the same for applications. Then a subset, more specifically, around their Microsoft 365 environment, all the stuff that's in OneDrive, all the way that file servers have been displaced by SharePoint sites and all of these things. And then finally, applications controlling production for headquarters, but also at 11 remote sites. This company fundamentally made a decision that the way they intended to compete better, to actually improve their performance as a business, was to invest in automation at the remote locations, plant automation, kind of leading into OT as opposed to just an IT approach. And that's how, they intended to get better. The risks and the restraints that they were looking to mitigate, again, kind of, nothing surprising here necessarily. Downtime equals stranded capacity and lost money. If it's a contact center that you're operating, or if it's a manufacturing location, the infrastructure cost and all of that certainly is the least of your concerns as a result of downtime. It's everything that's around it, from 1,500 agents in a contact center that are sitting there idled if you're having a network issue or a whatever issue, to the many, many, many thousands of, or millions of dollars invested in all of the infrastructure at remote locations that are making the widgets that drive the business. High expense, though, at the same time, if uptime is gold, you have the competing expense of having IT headcount on location at all of these sites to be able to diminish your downtime, to be able to get away from the travel time or whatever it is, that if you either have expensive resources located there for something that might happen, or you don't, and you suffer a big or else if you can't mitigate your issues quickly in order to balance this thing. Of course, it's natural. Everyone talks about public cloud, in spite of the fact that, yes, in my experience and industry experience, and I'm at HPE Discover in Las Vegas right now, all kinds of people here discovered, talking about repatriation and why, and this sort of thing. Fundamentally, reliance on public cloud solutions when the problem you're trying to solve for is uptime for a manufacturing facility in Omaha, Nebraska, that's not necessarily the way to get you home. And yes, there are now public cloud centric solutions that can be located on-prem, but they're also rack scale solutions, right? If you have 40 U of compute and storage that you have to have on site, maybe so if you're Boeing. But if you are making construction supplies, that's probably not necessarily a fit either. Having multiple hypervisors brings a lot of complexity into the business. All of these things, like the risks that they were facing, were the ones that pretty much everybody faces. Josh, if you go forward slide. And so, a lot of people will traditionally anyway go into this decision-making process focusing on technical constraints first. I actually just recently got to spend some time with David Linthicum, who's an incredible, authority in this field. He writes lots of columns in InfoWorld and things like this, but a brilliant guy. And he was telling me as well that in his experience also as the chief cloud strategy guy for Deloitte, what he sees still super frequently is people coming into a decision around digital transformation, thinking that it's principally about digital as opposed to being more about transformation, starting from the technical and going out, when in fact, the inventory of resources that go into all of this decision-making process, it's not just technology, it's people, it's uptime, it's time itself, and it's the money. So the conversation for this specific engagement, which is not unlike lots of ones that we have at Expedient, was around to optimize, both the cost and the timing of the expense to be able to solve this problem. This also, it's a little side note, but there are times as well, it can seem maybe counterintuitive, but maybe not. There's a brilliant article that is put out by the firm Andreessen Horowitz that is The Cost of Cloud, $1 Trillion Paradox is the title of the article. And it states that, for example, a company going into a digital transformation project about this, but that also has M&A activity on the horizon, principally being acquired, may actually have powerful financial incentives to go with a colo-centric solution, because all of the OpEx depresses EBITDA, which depresses the sale price because of multiples, right? Like there's lots of math that goes into this, and there's no one simple answer, which is why hybrid is finding the solution that delivers the maximum value to the business, not just the one that is the technically most sophisticated or most interesting or things like that. And again, this is something that it seems obvious when we talk about it, but it's also easy to overlook, because as all of us actually working in this field, sometimes there's a tendency that to be experts, we want to be up and on talking about what's newest, but what's newest isn't always what's most appropriate. It's not always what's most beneficial. And so this kind of grounding of the process, as this experience did in hybrid, not as necessarily the technical inputs, but the business outputs, finding the solution that delivers maximum value to the business was what drove it. So if we step forward now, one more slide, Josh. In this situation, and this is one, like my mud fence ugly slide here, was because I took the as-builts for this engagement and I just redacted everything, right? That's all of my blue boxes here. But this is actually really what was the result of an engagement with this customer that started from using some tools to understand what the workloads were, what the interdependencies between them were, and to focus that against as well all of the business drivers that they were trying to get after. So in this case, we had from the customer side a total of 12 locations, 1 headquarter, and then 11 remote sites, most of which were for manufacturing. And again, we talked about how this company's strategic imperative was to compete better in the marketplace through superior automation of functions at the manufacturing sites, right? So they went through and they said, okay, if that's how we're going to get home here, how are we going to accommodate and best align what we do with the outcomes that we're after? What we ended up then doing with them was they ran a scenario under which they looked at them doing all of this themselves. And so the big variables that you can see in my chart that's upper left for you would be, do they improve their operating posture if they do it themselves? And if they did this all as a CapEx and, you know, keeping it in-house, yes, their cost analysis, like they had a way to cover their VMware stuff and it was integrated. Yes, they had a way to handle Windows OS licensing that was required for all of these different things, but they didn't get any better from the ability to serve all of their sites because they still would fundamentally have the problem. If we are going to do these ourselves, how are we going to be working best on site reliability, handling the issues that come up in Wheeling, West Virginia, when I don't have IT people at a manufacturing site in Wheeling, West Virginia? Expedient was a participant in this. The solution that I'll get to here in just one second allowed us to say, yes, we can make it better for how you will operate at all of your sites. Yes, our cost basis for this, what we're presenting to you, allows you to include both your VMware and your Windows OS licensing, and then a couple of other alternatives that they considered. And fundamentally, the reason why this became an Expedient customer and an Expedient win was that we could do all of those for them. How did we do it? We effectively have 2 environments that are lower left here that are handling the core applications for this customer. One of which is then the principally production location where these applications are running, and the other is the DR site. Then we have, branching out from there, all of the remote locations where we have a couple of different things on there. It was March of this year, Expedient took to general availability an offering for Edge Cloud, where if we go back to talking about what Edge might have been, and we saw it in the context of Colo, there are edges and there are edges. This was our Edge offering that is ruggedized. It's a small chassis that is available to or capable of running it up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit with no heat issues. It's all flash, so vibration is not a problem. It's a ruggedized modular chassis with switching in it so that effectively you can put it in pretty adverse environments remotely where you don't have environmentals like you do at a data center. Bring along out-of-band management so that, if you're trying to do this over the internet, you have a locally survivable link. If the internet goes down, like we've had, with Josh's experience twice today, the production at the facility doesn't grind to a halt. We also, though, had there, for the people who were local, cohesity-based backups for data protection there, so that we can be, in the case of, for example, ransomware, having something to go back to if applications on the front end got hosed up for whatever reason, to be able to handle these things locally there. And then backhaul for all the cohesity sites, which is effectively every one at both, production and every one of these, backhauled to a third Expedient data center, so that, again, we have really good hedging against the risk there. In addition to this, though, we were able to handle all of the firewall level security and some other things for each one of these locations, so that all of the IT side of the business that was supporting the OT side of the business and all the remote sites were handled remotely administered by Expedient, with the ability, though, to dispatch people quickly to get on site at every one of them to remedy any of these sites, any of the issues that they were facing. In the meantime, as well, part of this, if you look lower left at my production and DR sites here, this icon that looks like a button between the two, one thing that is as well, in addition to like this Edge offering now that we're having really great success with, because it solves a very pressing and real business problem, be you manufacturing, medical, retail, anyone who really needs local survivability to keep the cash register ringing or the wheels turning. But also disaster recovery from Expedient includes orchestration of failover of the firewalling, not just the applications. So if for site reliability and for disaster recovery, what we're trying to do always is to most quickly as possible restore the highest level of functionality as possible. If the orchestration of applications to get back up and running is slick and elegant, but the firewalling and the ability to connect to it from other places is not, that's of limited usefulness. In this case, we were able to aggregate, again, this need for not only what the infrastructure is, but the security of the operations of this infrastructure into something that let them focus more deeply on what they're going to accomplish using technology to make the manufacturing operations go a little faster. So in this case, we do have multiple different private cloud instances, both for the center applications as well as the edge ones, but we also have multi-tenant, not hyperscale, but rather Expedient provided multi-tenant capacity to be aggregating, for example, all of the offsite Cohesity data protection workloads, so that in a situation like that, I don't need I don't need a Range Rover to go hunting. What I need is a pickup truck. We're able to actually align with the business need there to say, if I don't need the performance and I don't need the really on-site location of proper dedicated edge infrastructure, great. We'll actually then drive cost out by using multi-tenant infrastructure. But on the other hand, when the business imperative for one reason or another, be it because you scale up to the point where dedicated is less expensive for what you need it for, or simply for any other reason, to use dedicated infrastructure there. Then finally, again, it's something that is easily overlooked, and that is data protection around a PaaS or a SaaS offering like Microsoft 365. More people know now than maybe used to, but all of those things that we're doing in OneDrive, SharePoint sites and things like that, they're not necessarily inherently backed up, which is a way of saying they're not backed up by Microsoft. So in this case, hybridity that we're using in this case is actually enhancing the value that they're getting out of a SaaS platform as well as part of an integrated whole. So they had a pretty complex problem that wasn't solved by just one thing. And part of their thing that they were after, part of what drove to effectiveness of the solution was financial, but it wasn't just financial of the infrastructure. It was financial of the infrastructure, the people, the operation that all of that was supporting. Some of it was technological, some of it was geographic, some of it was operational. And we were able to actually engage with all of those elements to drive to having the right workloads in the right places. So last one for me, Josh, one more slide forward.
Yep. Alvaro came up with a new word, hybridity. So
yeah, well, I'll be trademarking it and expecting royalties any minute now. But this customer here again chose to consume a number actually of services from Expedient. But if we as service providers are in the business of problem solving, you want to have a good tool set that allows you to engage with a number of different problems and solve them in a way that's responsible to what's specific about that business and the context that it's in. So in this case, this customer chose, for example, multi-cloud firewall endpoint protection from us. And if in the future, for whatever reason, they were to want micro-segmentation and some other things downstream there, in that case, we're here for that. We're able to bring our security capabilities to bear to evolve with this customer and where their needs go. The part of it that could be tied to colocation, in their case, the colocation was relevant simply because all of our services were delivered out of the data centers that are operated by Expedient. So, all of the uptime that we can provide 100% SLA around cloud workloads, for example, is the result of the colocation of ours that it sits out of. In disaster recovery, in this case, Again, we had multiple ways we could solve this problem, and we brought multiple sets of these capabilities to bear to them. As their needs change, though, we will be here. Would they want a roadmap forward going to work in containers or VDI applications or all of these other things? Again, these are all capabilities that are available to us. And just tying back to earlier, what I said about categories being useful but inexact. In fact, the containers business and some of these other things are not something that's inherent to only a hyperscale provider. In fact, a provider like Expedient can do it out of infrastructure of our own as well, and doing it in a way that if you are not, wanting to take on the complexity of AKS, for example, great. We would do it on, a number of different options around containers and Kubernetes management, like lots of capabilities there. Finally, a service that this customer purchased that I didn't touch on because it kind of seems like a really granular detail, but to tie it to something that both, I guess, you see it in the news so much right now, ransomware. You see things that are going on. A good friend of mine, actually, his company has been going through trying to recover from a ransomware attack for 4 weeks now. And, one of the principal vulnerabilities that gets exploited actually to touch all of these things off is simply patching. And our ability to provide for this customer through our operations control capability, OS patching management for them, for both assets that are provided by Expedient as well as assets of their own that we did not provide for them, allows them to have, again, something that is like flossing your teeth. It is something that's kind of mundane. People don't like to do it, and that's why there are so many security issues going on, but it's really important to get done. Something as simple as that is something that we took on. So fundamentally, the hybrid in this case, we were able to align with this customer's needs, both technologically, financially, and strategically, using different sets of infrastructure to get them to the best outcome, which wasn't spending less money, which wasn't doing, so many of these things, but rather it was enabling the business to, in a cost-effective way, better compete and to better get return on not technology investments, all the investments of the business. So I don't have any more new words to coin, Josh. So maybe let me stop it right there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alvaro, for the great detail there and swinging it back to me. So, folks, I'm going to wrap up real quick here. Aside from working with our partners and addressing these areas that you see in front of you as we wrap up, what we're going to help is we're going to work with our partners and ourselves to kind of understand your application dependencies, right-sizing those workloads. We're going to do the cost analysis for you, your current state versus that future state. What does that look like? I.e., how you're doing it now could be a premise scenario versus what does it look like on a cloud scenario analysis. And like I said, the byproduct of that is identifying applications that also can be moved to SaaS as an optimization efforts there. So I appreciate everyone, time and effort to join. Josh, I think we're good here. I bid adieu to everybody. I hope you got a lot out of it, and we will probably be sharing this recording at a future state for colleagues that couldn't join. Thank you.